Good evening, sports fans. And how you doing, family? And welcome to Curious Formula Live. I am your host and moderator, Curious Formula. Thank you for joining us today. Please make sure you subscribe, like, and comment below. Hit the notification bell so you are aware when we go live. We go live every Wednesday night, typically at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today we're starting at 10 p.m. And I'm just glad you're rocking with your boy. We're building this thing as we fly. So let's jump right into what we're talking about today. This is our music that we set up to bring you in nice and slow. Tell me what you think about it. But let's jump right into our content tonight. And our content is going to be chock full of all the things that you want to hear and all the things that you want to see. And so we're going to jump right into it. But again, please make sure you subscribe and like below. Please make sure that you are, rocking with us here, knowing what we're talking about, knowing what we're doing. And we appreciate you being with us. So, polls. What do they all mean? I know you're seeing, if you're following this election, you're seeing polls coming out every other day. You're seeing polls come out talking about, this person's in the lead, Trump's in the lead, Harris in the lead, battleground states, nationals, polling, likely voters, registered voters. What's going on? Who's telling the truth? What can we follow? Well, which ones do we believe in and why, right? So first, let me just say that, like I always say, polls are snapshots in time, and they alone in and of themselves cannot really tell you who's going to win the election. They're snapshots in time. Today and a poll today with a poll tomorrow and a poll from last week and a poll from last month will give you an idea about trends. Will give you an idea about sort of but particularly what's sort of happening, what's trending, and what trend lines are looking like. And so a good example of this is, right after the Biden debate that Donald Trump trounced Joe Biden, aka the Crypt Keeper. Overall, you saw Donald Trump's overall polling go up on a number of different polls. Some polls that lean right, some polls that lean left, some polls that are in the middle, some that are well thought of, some that are not well thought of. What you saw was a general trend of movement and people's opinions and thoughts and preferences about him and his candidacy start to go up. And that was sort of universal. That was indicative of a trend. And likewise, when Kamala Harris became the nominee, the presumptive nominee, you saw a lot of those things change and go in the other direction. And what we've seen since she's become the presumptive nominee and then the official nominee of the Democratic Party, and then the DNC happening, Democratic National Convention, and then the debate, what you've seen is a constant uptick of Kamala Harris polling that is showing her in the lead. But I will tell you that the number itself is not really what's important in polling. Polling crosstabs are most important. What are crosstabs? That's sort of the disaggregated information that looks at, different ethnic groups and parts of the country and, yes, battleground states and age demographics and income and suburban versus urban and rural versus urban. And you get a whole lot of sort of micro measurements that inform the overall measurement of who do you approve of and who do you disapprove of. And that, taken along a long period of time with about 9 or 10 other indices, kind of gives you a snapshot in time of where the race is right now. But action actually drives polls. And that's what I want to get over to people. The other thing I want to say is that, you got to make sure you look at the 11 states that I told you, if you watch my content, are the only states you should be watching right now when you think about sort of where this race is going. And those 11 states are obviously the battleground states, right? They're the states of Michigan. They're the states of Pennsylvania. They're the states of Wisconsin. They're the states of Georgia, the state of North Carolina, state of Nevada, the state of Arizona, state of New Mexico. And now we have to add in a few more, right? We have to add in the state of Nebraska. Why? Because there is a way to earn electoral votes there without winning the state. You can get one electoral vote if you win a congressional district in Nebraska. Obama did it in 2008. I think Biden did it again in 2020. So Nebraska plays in there because that's how tight this electoral college win could be for either one of the candidates. And then you have to add in two others. You have to add in Texas and Florida. Now, why am I adding Texas and Florida? Democrats are moving up and doing better there with only 50 days left than they've done in years, literally since the Obama administration and the Obama campaign in 2008 and 2012. Now, can Democrats ultimately win Texas, ultimately win Florida? I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. But the fact that they're close, within 5 percentage points in one, and I think within 5 percentage points in another, it's very close. And it's also making the Senate races in those particular states close too. When you look at the Cruz race and the Scott race, the Democrats are within striking distance. And so that gives you a bellwether as to how Kamala Harris is doing nationally. And as it stands right now, she's leading in all, if not most, of the traditional battleground states and keeping it close in some of the states that weren't traditionally battleground states. And that gives you an idea about where we are. Other quick thing I would say is at this point in time, when you talk about polling, you got to sort of look through, around, and in between poll numbers right now. What does that mean? As I said, the poll numbers in and of themselves aren't going to tell you a lot of information. It's the crosstabs, it's the demographics, it's the trends with all the crosstabs and demographics. Because again, as I said, like Rasmussen, which is a Republican-leaning polling firm, has Trump up, 49% to Harris's 47%, but Morning Consult has Harris up 51% to Trump's 45%. The key is not in those numbers. It's the numbers and the data that's in between those particular numbers. All right, so that's what we're talking about in those particular numbers. But what do I mean by looking in between and seeing certain things? Well, two content creators that I like and I watch on TikTok, and I will tell you to go look at them as well, Cannon Fodder, and somebody that I'm going to have you listen to here, James Whiskey Soldier on IG, but he's James Whiskey Soldier also on this wonderful platform, TikTok. Black Uhuru, thanks for rocking with me, man. Good to see you here. Put your comments here. If you have questions you want me to answer, we're happy to do it. But I want you to listen. If you're here listening, please make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. But also put a 1 in the chat if you're hearing me well. I want to make sure you hear the content. But I want to play something from James Whiskey Soldier that kind of gives you a little information about how you look at polls, what polling will tell you. And I also want to tell you one of the things that he's now saying is something that we're going to talk about in greater depth tonight. But as the weeks go on, in terms of where I think the race is going, he's hitting the nail on the head. And I think what he says is going to surprise many of you, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Harris supporter. So just hold on to your horses.
You have to start telling your MAGA family members, and you know the ones I'm talking about, that 2024 is going to be a landslide and not some giant conspiracy. The mainstream media is not going to report on it because they can't, and the major polling firms are not going to report on it because they can't. The reason they can't is a term called probability. Now, probability polling relies on taking a subset of the population, applying mathematics and statistics to that subset, and making an educated guess as to how a majority of the population is going to vote. Now, that is a very rudimentary breakdown of polling, but it will suffice for my explanation.
Okay, before he goes into it, thanks, Erica. Thanks for being here. I'm glad that you're here, rocking with me. Spread the word for us a little bit. So James Whiskey Soldier kind of tells you something that I think should be earth-shattering to you if you're not watching this. He says that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to win this election in a landslide. And I agree. Boom. And he's going to lay out some reasons why, and I'm going to add to some of those things here, but I feel confident enough now, yes, with only 50 days left in this race, to say it out loud. And I told you all last week, if you watched my content, I was looking at numbers, I was looking at trends, I was talking to people on the ground in both campaigns, because I have contacts in both, and what I'm seeing and what I'm witnessing, and you can tell by the reactions of the Republican Party and Trump supporters, this election is about to be a blowout. And that's something that the modern mainstream media are not telling you. They're not showing you, because I told you, if you watch my content from 2 or 3 years ago, that mainstream media and the 24-hour cable news service is invested in playing you about horse races when there are none. When there is a big advantage for a candidate, they're never going to tell you that, because they're invested in making sure that you're there for the clicks and likes, that you're there for the content to keep you on the edge of your seat, that we can't tell who's going to win. They're never going to share with you that information. I'm telling you now, on this platform, we tell you things that you're not going to hear anyplace else. And I'm now joining up with people like James Whiskey Soldier, some other people who are sort of outliers on TikTok and outliers on YouTube and outliers on other platforms. We're saying it loud, because the data and the way the trends are happening in this race shows us, if you've learned it and been part of campaigns as long as I have, which is over 40 years, that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are headed for a landslide election. Stay tuned.
It's much better at determining the national popular vote, but it is absolutely terrible at weighting the states and the Electoral College, because the United States is effectively broken down into 11 or more separate subcultural regions. This problem has been getting progressively worse the last few years, and it is at a fever pitch right now. That doesn't include how polarizing Donald John Trump is to the American electorate. The key here is going to be the independent vote, and that hasn't even started to take shape yet. My friend Kathy, Cannon's Fodder, if you're not following her, you absolutely should be, has a great take on this from a historical perspective. But here's what a lot of folks aren't taking into account right now. You could not pay left-leaning independents to vote for Donald Trump. Undecided independents haven't been paying attention yet and won't be for probably another 30 days or so. And they're going to be so off-put by Donald Trump when they finally do start paying attention that they're almost guaranteed to vote for Kamala Harris.
Now, it's important what he talked about. He talked about independence, right? And if you watch my commentary, I've been talking about independence for as long as I have had breath, and have been doing this kind of outreach and this kind of platform. Independents are the key to Donald Trump winning election. As I told you all here, in 2016, Donald Trump won a narrow victory against Hillary Clinton, because he won independent voters, right? And it was narrow. His vote total was narrow. Donald Trump has to win independents. And he hasn't won them since 2016. In 2018, right? What did we talk about? In 2018, what are we talking about? We're talking about him getting independent voters. And in 2016, in 2018, in the midterm elections, what happens? Donald Trump loses in the midterms. Why? Because Republicans do not win independent voters. 2020 race. Did Donald Trump lose re-election because of voter fraud? No. Donald Trump loses in 2020 because of he did not win independents. In 2022, remember the red wave that never materialized? Why did it never materialize to hit the shores of America the way Fox News said, and the way Newsmax said, and the way all the other conservative pundits said? Say it with me as a choir who's on key and singing their best notes ever. Republicans did not win independence. It's as simple as that, folks. And he had been ahead with independents against Joe Biden. But when Kamala Harris entered the race, it flipped. And now, as James Whiskey Soldier is saying, the left-leaning independents are all voting for Kamala Harris, which is why you see her numbers starting to grow. She's getting closer to 50%. One poll has her at 50% and 51%. And while Donald Trump is stuck at 46, 45, his high has been 47. He can't move because independents have not even talking to him. And according to James Whiskey Soldier, some of those independents have not even started paying attention yet. And when they start paying attention, what are they going to see? An unhinged Donald Trump who has failed to expand his coalition to include a big tent to bring people into his camp, to bring people into his base and increase his numbers. He's been just going off the hinges, just attacking. No policies, no vision, no what he plans on doing. And the things he says he is planning on doing that he's talking about, no Republican in Congress is supportive of it. So he wouldn't have the votes to get it passed there, even if he was to get elected. Let's proceed.
And a vast majority of right-leaning
Rockman.
independents will either abstain or just hold their nose and vote for Kamala Harris. There were actual Republican Party officials at the Democratic National Convention advocating for Republicans to vote for Kamala Harris. To call that unprecedented is an understatement. I mean, 15% of the Republican Party will either abstain from voting out of disgust for Donald Trump or they will vote for Kamala Harris.
Now listen, I don't listen to this man's content. This is the first time I've listened to it was a couple of days ago, and he called the same number that I've been calling for over 6 months. There's a 15%, that is literally the number he said, 15% of Ronald Reagan mainstream conservative Republicans that are not going to vote for Donald Trump. I don't care how you slice it. I don't care how you cut it up. I don't care what you say. They're not voting for him. And he had a chance to try to reclaim them. These are the Nikki Haley voters. These are the Nikki Haley voters who voted for Nikki Haley in the Republican primary. The 15% who voted for her when she had dropped out of the race, her name was just on the ballot, that voted for her in Indiana. The 15% that voted for her in Maryland. These are the same 15% of Republicans who the day after Donald Trump was convicted on 34 criminal counts in a New York court said that 15%, that same 15% who said that Donald Trump should not, that they were not going to vote for him, that he should drop out of the race. That's the same 15%. And they are moving towards Kamala Harris in droves. Republicans for Harris is a real organization, it's a real group. If you follow my content here, you know 6 months ago, again, I tell you things here that they don't tell you on the mainstream media, and we said it 6 months ago. Check it yourself. Check it for yourself. We said that there will be a Republican organization. Hey, Thomas, thanks for joining us. Rock, thanks for joining us. Erica, thanks for joining us. We said quite emphatically, right, that there would be an organized Republican group that would be well-funded, that would be large and in charge, that would have a real part of the campaign from the Democratic side. And who did we say was going to be in this Republican for Harris group? We said it was going to be former members of Congress and their staffs who left Congress rather than be under the presidency of Donald Trump in 2016 and in 2018 and in 2020 and 2024. Heck, Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, gave 2 weeks notice and left Congress this year rather than run under the banner of MAGAism and his party, right? We said who else was going to be part of it? The Never Trumpers, obviously, right? The Chris Christies of the world, the Christine Todd Whitmans of the world, all those other folks. We said they were going to be part of it. We also said that there were going to be people from the Trump administration because 65% of Trump appointees and people who worked in the executive office have said that he is unfit to serve as president again. But now we've been surprised by others who have joined the Republicans for Harris, right? It has been staffers from the Reagan administration, staffers from the George H.W. Bush administration, staffers from the George W. Bush administration, staffers from Mitt Romney's staff, staffers from John McCain's staff, right? Staffers. Real Republicans who've been Republicans a lot longer than Donald Trump has been a Republican have balked and ran away from him, right? And are now supporting this. Let's just keep listening going forward, just a little bit longer.
Opinion polls are absolutely not equipped for taking that into account when they're weighting their numbers. Opinion polls are weighting the independent vote based on historical trends, not on the last 3.5 years of Donald Trump's repugnant behavior, his indictments, nor his declining mental health. Now, I live in Kentucky, and I'm not even sure if Donald Trump can carry this state right now, and we're still 60 days out. Donald Trump will not carry Texas. He will not carry Florida. He will not carry Pennsylvania. He will not carry North Carolina. He will not carry any of the battleground states at all. He will not carry many of the Republican strongholds, and he will most certainly not win the 2024 election. The difficulty is going to be in convincing his most ardent supporters not to become violent as a result, because Donald Trump is not going to accept the results of the 2024 election. His pathology and his narcissism will not allow him to accept the results of the election. Fortunately, though, in approximately 60 days, the United States is going to be able to move past Donald Trump.
Okay, so you heard that here. Now listen, I'm not somebody who's going to say that Donald Trump is going to win Kentucky. I'm not even willing to say he's going to win Texas and Florida. But as I said when we started off having this conversation, the fact that he's this close in these states that were written off as late as 3 months ago is proof that there is something building here. My man Rockman said it best on a live we were on together on TikTok. He said there's something building here that the mainstream media does not want to say is happening. And I agree with him. And there's been more evidence since that TikTok that we did together that is exactly what's happening here. There is something building here that the mainstream media is not going to tell you is building because they are invested in a horse race. They're invested in saying this thing is tight. They're invested in saying this thing is going to be, neck and neck until election night. That's how they sell advertising. That's how they get ads. That's how they keep you viewing them, whether you're on the right or on the left. The other thing I'll say is this: new registrations are not being included in the polling. That's another thing you got to look at when you look at these polling numbers, that there's new registrations happening regularly, and they have not been included in polling because they're new voters. They're not part of the list that pollsters call. And that has been almost 3-1 for Kamala Harris and the Tim Walz ticket. You look at things like, Taylor Swift and people calling the line to register to vote. Well, who do you think those people are going to vote for? They're not included in polls. They never will be. But when you start looking at how those numbers are, they're going to eventually be included in those polls, and they're going to eventually be included in those calls, and that's going to grow her even more. And even if they're not included, that's still a vote that pollsters will not pick up. They're not going to pick up the new registrants, and they are skewing 3, 4, 5 to 1 to Kamala Harris and Democrats. So now we have independents who you can't pick up because they're not registered to vote. They're not registered Democrats or Republicans, and they're not tuning in yet. But we know when they do tune in, the kind of Donald Trump they're going to see. And they're going to see Donald Trump from maybe a year ago. They're seeing the crazed, unhinged Donald Trump when they make their final decisions. And now we're talking about the new registrations that are not being picked up by polling, but are going 5 to 1, 3 to 1, 2 to 1 in different places around the country, again, towards Kamala Harris. The last thing I'll say about this is look at how both campaigns are doing their get out the vote efforts. What you're seeing is with the Democrats is a traditional GOTV. You see the Harris campaign flush with cash, putting up ads that are getting under the skin of Donald Trump in battleground states, and you're seeing 30, 40, 50 offices opening up in places like North Carolina and Arizona. She's got troops on the ground, volunteers set up, and they're going after her vote. She added David Plouffe, the guru of targeting from the Barack Obama campaign, to her staff. And trust me, David knows how to find votes in the reddest states, in the reddest counties, in the reddest states to do what we call minimizing the losses that she has, that she will take in red countries. And so their GOTV is getting offices open and votes and volunteers out the doors and doing their hard work. What the Republicans are doing is they're putting their money in these things called voter integrity volunteers. that are going to go around and sniff out what they say are voters who shouldn't be voting and pointing out irregularities in voting and looking at the integrity of the vote. Now, when the Dems are doing it, their effort looks a lot like an effort that's built for winning an election. And the Trump team seems like they're building for contesting an election. You make a decision. But that's what polls are, and that's what they're doing. And I think that's why it's important for us to be honest about what's happening in this race. And I'm predicting a blowout. You heard it here first. Well, actually, you heard it with my man, Mr. Whiskey there. But you heard it here first in terms of where this race is going and who's actually going to win and by how much. All right? Let's move on to something else. Feel free, again, to subscribe, like, and comment below. Put your comments in, your questions in. We're happy to talk about them as well. So one of the things that we want to talk about here as well is, and I said we were going to talk about controversial issues, so we're going to talk about controversial issues. So the abortion debate, what the left does not take into account. And there are two things that the left does not take into account when you're talking about the abortion issue. And yes, my disclaimer is that I am a Christian and I am somebody that is personally against abortion. However, I do not push my other disclaimer, I do not push my personal beliefs and my faith on the decisions of women and families who have to consult with each other, with their physician, and with their God about what they should do about life that is growing in their body. And while we all are part of the parcel of saying that a woman's right to choose is paramount, that Kamala Harris has staked her campaign, indeed has breathed new life into her campaign, breathed new life into the Democrats' efforts here because of the overturning of Roe with the Dobbs decision that came out of the new SCOTUS, right, the new Supreme Court that was appointed, 3 members appointed by Donald Trump. He promised the left, the right, that he would get rid of Roe, and he did exactly that by appointing the most conservative members of the Federalist Society to the court with the sole objection, the sole desire, the sole goal, the sole objective of getting rid of Roe, which they did. But the one thing I want to just caution the left on, and I consider myself a pragmatic progressive. That's my disclaimer. I'm on the left. The two things that the left does not take into account when they have the discussion about life and about abortion, and that is, when does life begin? As number one. Let's start there. So I want to just play a little bit about somebody who I know most of you probably do not like because of how he talks about women and men. But I think it's important to hear Matt Walsh talking at the National Celebrate Life Gala in 2024. And just listen to a couple of things that he has to say.
It's the most fundamental and basic and essential thing of all, which is life. And what is it that most undermines, destroys, and threatens life in this country? Well, all of us in this room know that it's abortion. Abortion is still, for my money, and I think for everybody in this room, the defining issue of our time. It is still the wall that separates one side of the political divide from the other. And it is a wall that is built with the bodies of 60 million dead babies.
And let me stop it there, because this is the major border, the major gulf, the major divide between pro-life and pro-choice supporters. It's, when does life begin? If you listen to Matt Walsh talk about this issue, he says baby. And I know some on the left say, well, it's a fetus. Fetus is Greek for small baby, right? So we're playing with terms here. The right and supporters of life, pro-life supporters, see it as a distinction between what people term on the left as being a woman's right to choose, with balancing out, the right says it needs to be balanced out with the right of the baby growing in her womb who cannot choose. The left has to get this. The right sees the life growing in that woman's uterus as being a distinct life affirming, alive child that is growing within her stomach and has rights. That's why they want the government to be involved. They believe now, I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm trying to let you get a peer into what the right thinks about abortion. And it's not an anti-woman's right to choose. It's predicated upon what they see as a woman's right to choose and a baby's inability to have a say in its own life and and being able to be born or to be terminated. And that's the crux of it. And it often seems like the left does not hear the right and the right does not hear the left when they're talking about this. Now, you disagree with when you think life begins. Again, that's the central argument here, is when does life begin? Science teaches us that life begins at conception. People debate it. I haven't heard the science to tell me that that's not true. You may question what kind of life that is. You can question whether that life is sentient or not, meaning that it has thoughts and ideas and even recognizes that it is here. He or she is here. That's a debate for another time. But we shouldn't be. I like to have discussions about these kind of things, but understand where they're coming from, both left and right, on this whole situation here. And if you want to equate it to something that I think might resonate with you, particularly if you're an African American, is the way certain white Americans viewed slavery, and particularly African Americans. It can be argued, and it is argued by several pro-life people, that to not regard the life in a woman's womb as a living, sentient being that should have a choice in its existence or not, and though it cannot within her womb, then the government has to be that arbiter, that defense lawyer, that defender of life. They equate it to a slave issue, right? Rachel says, if they think it's a baby, I like child support set and getting the tax credit for the fees. Yes. So, Rachel, we agree there. Came in during a fun time. Yes, you did. Rachel came in right in the middle of us talking about this. And I want to pick my words carefully, because the goal here is not to have you agree or disagree with the position. It's to get you to understand where the right is coming on this stuff, right? And they equate it with slavery in the sense that slavery was allowed. Slavery was even pushed. Slavery was even supported by law based on a false premise. And it was based on a false premise that African Americans, black people, black Americans, Africans were not whole people. That we were 3/5 of a human being. Hence, we did not have the right to vote. Did not have any rights or privilege or that had to be respected by a court. Dred Scott decision. Could not own property. Could not marry. Could not read or write or go attend school. And unlike any other slavery in the history of the world, which is what we always say American chattel slavery was different than, say, the slavery in the Bible, chattel slavery in America, because they thought of Africans as being less than human, then could perpetuate slavery not just on you, but on your offspring, generation after generation after generation. And it was because they had to say that we were not human. So what did the science say back then? It said things like Africans' brains were smaller, that we couldn't learn at the same rate, that we were built to do manual labor, that we were a step above animals, essentially, that we enjoyed it. That's the reason why S.A.ing was allowed amongst the slave women and the masters. That's why you could force an African man to have children with an African woman, because you were promulgating more cattle, more workers. But the basic foundation of that thought and that thinking, and why people could actually do that to another human being, was to dehumanize that person, was to dehumanize the African and say that he is less than. Because God forbid we're doing this to a group of people who can think like we think, who can reason like we reason, who can be president, who can run corporations. We have to treat them as other. And that's in a lot of reasons why still today on right-wing radio, and even Matt Walsh, the guy I'm actually playing the video of, thinks less of black people, thinks that we're less capable. It goes back to those same kind of doctrine, that I can segregate you, I can keep you down, I can have a KKK and lynch you and take you out because you're not much better or smarter than a dog or an animal or a wild animal. You can be put down. And it's the same thinking that happens when you start talking about the abortion issue. That I'm talking the pro-life side now. They're saying that you can go along with an abortion as long as you think that what you're aborting is not an actual baby. It's not sentient, it's not thinking, it's not actually alive. Stay with me on it. Okay?
Over 60 million babies have been killed through abortion, well over 60 million at this point. And the death toll is staggering. It's greater than anything the world has ever seen by order of magnitude. These victims, these children, have been killed legally by human hands in a little building in your local shopping mall that you drive by on your way to work or to Applebee's or to run errands. They've been killed at the behest of their own parents with the help of so-called doctors, facilitated and funded by the government. And in response to the silent screams of these human sacrifices, all there has been from so many in our culture is a giant yawn.
So let me stop you there. To the second thing that the left does not understand when talking about abortion, most people on the left, most liberals, most progressive, most people who have a hard line, pro or con, zero sum on the issue of abortion, have never seen or actually know what an abortion procedure actually entails. And I know we have some medical professionals here online who are watching, and that's not to belittle people who are pro-choice. What it does say is, if you've ever seen a video, and they're out there, you can't watch them on YouTube, you can't really see them anyplace unless you specifically find a video of it put out typically by a pro-life organization, I will say, but I've seen numerous ones. To actually watch what happens to an aborted child and to hear cries of pain and to watch limbs be taken apart. And I don't mean to be graphic or rude here, and I'll stop there. It changes your thinking about what it is. Now, I know what pro-choice people will say, that most abortions will happen at a certain part in time earlier than that, right? But when you look at the tools of suctions and those kind of things, and the forceps and the things that they use to do an abortion, and the trauma that women feel afterwards and the like, not saying they should be discredited or that everybody should watch it, but it does present another perspective if you have actually seen it. And again, it goes to, like, I don't want to see, I don't want to know, I don't want to understand what the reality of an abortion actually is in terms of as a medical procedure, what's entailed with it. And it's not always like some providers would have you believe, easy, safe, and without risk. And that's something else to be brought into this debate and this discussion, because when I hear people on the right bring these kind of issues up, they're immediately dismissed or put aside. And that's a fault of the left, because if we're going to have a real understanding and a real conversation about this, then we have to talk about it with the facts, with the data, because if we demand that from the right, when they criticize leftist policies or progressive policies, that you don't have data, you don't have research, you don't have science, right, to support your findings and your thinking, then my question to the left is the same thing. When we have data, when we have research, when we have the science, and we can look at the medical procedures of what is happening and the definitions about when life begins, that we have to be honest and look at that data, research it, and look at the actual procedure for what it is and call it for what it is before we actually go forward with how we feel about an issue, where we stand on that issue, and how we are going to actually work to find solutions to it. I happen to believe that we need to make abortions rare. We need to make sure that we do a lot to make sure that there are other options for women who have children and get pregnant. There has to be exceptions, in my opinion, for rape, incest, and certain life-threatening diseases. And then the pro-lifers have to be honest and say that you're pro-life outside the womb, that you support child care, that you support an income supports to you if you're not working or don't have enough money to raise a child, that you have to support things like the Harris proposal for $6,000 for a child coming on, that you have to support things like baby bonds to invest in a child's future, that you have to invest in family planning, that you have to invest in teaching people how to work with their budgets, that you have to provide the things necessary like a child tax credit to halve poverty by 50% in America, that you then have to also support and push foster care, and push adoption, and lead by example, right wing, adopt kids. Do what God commands us to do, not just in word and condemnation, that's in the Bible, but also about how you live your life and what you do to support the least of these by your own personal example and by your own personal sacrifice. Rachel says, "I'd say that the nation needs comprehensive mandatory sex education." Yes, and I would add, Rachel, mandatory comprehensive sex education that's also predicated on the options that are available to people to make sure that they never find themselves in these situations, but to make sure that if they do find themselves in situations, that there are other options they can go around, and that there are loving institutions and churches, and yes, people who love Allah and love God and love Yahweh, who will say, we will step up and live out the creed of what we believe and be parents, or create communities with parents, or communities where we can have surrogate parents. It's all about comprehensive solutions, but it's important that we get out of our algorithm and our ideology and start addressing the issues for what they are and take them on head first to find real solutions that are actually going to save people and create a holistic answer to life and to family and to the things that we hold important as Americans. All right. Are Republicans right about Hollywood and the music industry? Are Republicans right about Hollywood and the music industry? You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Brother Love, whatever he's calling himself this week. Unless your head's been buried under 10 pounds of sand, you recognize that Puff Daddy is not only being held until trial, which means that this thing is a lot bigger than we initially thought, but the things he's been alleged to have done, how much baby oil was in the house? How much lubricant was in the house? I mean, was that like I don't know. That's like sex training. That's what it seems like. Like people were training for sex in Diddy's house. I mean, I don't know what that's all about. But the point I'm trying to make here, and let me just play this what Stephen A. Smith talks about, because he puts it right on point here. And it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves whether Republicans have been right all along. Stay tuned. Listen.
It ain't just P. Diddy that's in trouble with all of this, because he's in a world of trouble. He's in a world of trouble, but that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about Hollywood being in a world of trouble. And if you're being honest, I ain't the only one thinking like that. So are y'all. Stephen A. Smith Show in the house, coming right at you right now.
All right, so Stephen A. Smith indicted Hollywood. And the question I have to ask is, we used to laugh when Republicans used to talk about the debaucherous nature of the culture in Hollywood and in the music industry, and, how that's ruining kids' lives. And we used to say, oh, you guys are so old-fashioned. You sound like my father or my mother or my grandparents talking about music and what it's doing to kids and whatnot. And that was before Harvey Weinstein. And that was before Bill Cosby. And that was before Woody Allen. And that was before R. Kelly. And now we're confronted with P. Diddy. And I'm missing a few others in here, right? We're talking about, what's my man that was Trump's friend? Somebody in the chat, give me his name, who deleted himself in prison, who was matching people up with the rich and famous, right? We've heard stories about Mick Jagger, having relations with Mackenzie Phillips, right under with her father's permission. The allegation that Mackenzie himself had relations with his own daughter. Is Hollywood and the industry getting to a level where it's unconscionable? And the reason why I raise it is because if you watch my content, I talk about social issues all the time, that, social issues are a concern of middle America. They don't seem to be the concern of folks on the coast, on the East Coast or on the West Coast, but they certainly are real concerns about people in the middle, people in the South, people in the Midwest, people in the far West. And it seems that progressives and the Democratic Party really kind of give them short shrift. In fact, we double up on how many people in Hollywood and the music industry and people in that industry like supporting our candidates and writing checks for us without checking the culture that they are actually bringing with them. And look, you guys know I'm a critic of the culture, and I don't want to seem like I'm an old guy, but when I watch the VMAs or I watch the BET Awards and I'm watching the kind of music that's out there, I feel like a very old guy. But I also feel like the what's out there, the over sexualization, the young people who are actually doing this stuff. And again, I sound like an old codger, I know, but it's a lot different than when I was a kid. It's a lot different than when I was in my 20s, 30s, 40s as well. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of light there. It seems there's a lot of darkness there. And it seems like rappers are dying at younger ages and are, we had Biggie and Tupac, but you can count with two hands, more than two hands, how many young rappers have been, deleted over the years in the last 5 to 10 years. A lot more than were during the time that I was growing up. You look at the fact that every rapper, every female rapper has to get naked, does not have talent, is a one-hit wonder. And you look at, again, who I sort of like, P. Diddy is kind of like Berry Gordy for my generation in terms of hip hop. And what has it wrought? What have we created? What has been the issue with these folks existing in their sick relationships and sick actions for decades before we call them out? Or they're the product of, backroom talking or locker room talk when we say, oh, man, yeah, R. Kelly sure loves young girls, man. Wow. Bill Cosby, there's rumors about him roofing people. I can remember, the character on Saturday Night who played Fat Albert, who was saying that, Bill Cosby told him, man, after you play this role, man, you know how much pee you're going to be getting? And he was like, he said, my first thought was, this is an interview that Keenan gave on Howard Stern many years ago. He said, man, I thought they're like, Bill Cosby's a freak. This was like, 15 years ago, right? So we've allowed it to fester. We've allowed it to grow. We've allowed it to become not just part of a culture. It's been part of our culture, and we've excused it. And the people who have been abused by it have been women, have been children, have been the uninitiated, and the hush money, and the people who've been bought off, the people who may have dirt on them to keep this stuff quiet, on all these folks, not just Diddy, is concerning, because we have to start questioning what is happening to our nation, what is happening to our culture, but how is the world shaping up to be a place where any of us want to raise our children? How can we protect our children when a certain lifestyle that is sick and hedonistic and about self-gratification and self-pleasure trumps how you feel and treat other people? That people are just tools and they're disposable objects for your pleasure. And when you're done with them, then I'll throw you out, or I'll make you sign an NDA, or I'll just pay you some money under the table to settle with you so that none of this stuff comes out, or I'll put you on the payroll, or I'll give you a acting contract or a music contract for a few years, just so I feel like you've gotten your just due. Republicans have a point, and Democrats better listen, because although social issues have not risen to a major level in terms of this election, because of the stink that is around Donald J. Trump and the threat that he is to our institutions and to our way of life, but we won't always have Donald Trump to kick around, and he will not always be the threat that we will have to save us from ourselves. Democrats, we must do better. We must say more, and we must stop being in love with getting the approval and the support and the checks from Hollywood and the industry that is essentially destroying our way of life and bringing a culture that I don't think anybody wants to see or hear from. So, what does that leave us in terms of my last bit of commentary here? So my commentary, my way, wants to talk about what happens if Donald Trump loses. And this is the revised edition. So we talked about sort of how Kamala Harris is doing well. As I expect, it will be a landslide victory in November. But that begs the question, what happens to MAGA? And what happens to MAGA if and when Donald Trump loses? And so we talked a little bit about this in my content earlier from a few weeks ago, some of the real specific things that have happened. But I really think if you look at how unhinged his campaign has become, when you look at the things he said, the things they're hitting back on, if you watch content on the Midas Touch, that's what I watch a lot of on YouTube. But I watch a lot of Newsmax as well. And I watch a lot of other sort of alt-right content creators here on YouTube and in other places. The reality is that they are becoming more and more unhinged. They are, from Kamala Harris having an earring in her ear, and I think about an earpiece in her earring during the debate from, she is just regurgitating the same things over and over again, that she's not that bright, and they're going over warmed over tropes, things that we know are not true, things that have been disproved. They just keep regurgitating them, saying them over and over and over again. And the desperation continues to grow with their pitches. The desperation continues to grow with their rhetoric. The J.D. Vance saying, I'm just going to invent stories, right? Because America just won't wake up and see what Joe Biden really is. They won't wake up and see what Kamala Harris really is. They're just still asleep. And so if I got to invent stuff and I have to create stories out of thin air, if I have to say that Haitians coming across the border are eating dogs and Venezuelan gangsters are taking over apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado. And even though it's been found out that the mayor of that city and the governor of the state who are Republicans say it's not happening, that the Haitians that are there are nationals that have visas that are here legally and have been invited by local industry to take the jobs that they couldn't fill because of COVID. And so these people are like rightfully here. They were invited to be here. And you're visiting threats and potential harm to them. Proud Boys are all up in Ohio right now looking for these folks, okay? And you take no responsibility for that. That's your campaign tactic. It does not bode well for what's going to happen later. So let me just say what I think will happen really soon. I think you'll start to see more calls that the election is rigged with about 21 days left, 3 weeks left. You have early voting that will be happening then and whatnot. So you're going to start seeing them saying, much like Donald Trump did, there's precedent for this in 2016 in the primary race for the Republican primary for the nomination of the Republican Party. He kept saying that you know, if he loses the Republican nomination, it's rigged because there's no way he can lose. He won the nomination. He said in 2016, with about 21 days left, that's why I picked that date. I mean, those numbers of days, that when he's running against Hillary Clinton, if I lose this race, it's rigged. It's being stolen from me. He won in 2016, so I guess it wasn't stolen, right? 2020, we all know how that went, right? He's been saying that for 4 years. So look for Donald Trump, because the script has been written already. With 21 days left to start talking about the election is rigged. Look for attacks on early absentee voting with 14 days left. Early voting, absentee voting will be in full blast. It's already starting in Pennsylvania. It's already starting in a number of other states. But look, with 14 days left, 2 weeks left, when he starts to recognize where those early absentee ballots are coming in from in terms of the field, when he starts looking at where early voting is happening and where the lines are in various states, he's going to start talking about, he's going to start talking that those systems, that early voting is creating fraud and abuse, and absentee voting is creating fraud and abuse. Never mind that Donald Trump voted for himself in 2016 and 2020 with absentee vote. Definitely did it in Florida. And then I think with 7 days left, you're going to start seeing calls to call off the election. I know what some of you are saying. What? Nobody's going to call for that. Nobody's going to call for. Yes. Look for Donald Trump to say the election does not need to be held in November with 7 days left, because there's been so much cheating. There's been so much falsification of, illegal aliens have been voting all over the place. Those Venezuelan nationals who took over a war, are voting. The Haitian immigrants, the migrants, they're voting. Everybody's voting. We got proof of it. And so the whole election needs to stop. November 5th is too fast. It's coming on too fast. We need to postpone the election. You're going to start seeing calls for that. And then lastly, I think you're going to start seeing on election day, you're going to start seeing news reports and press conferences and social media videos from content creators who are on the alt-right on election day talking about the amount of people who are illegally voting. And they will say, see, we see these people here. These people are not registered to vote. They don't have any IDs, so on and so forth. You're going to see press conferences on election day by Donald Trump and his surrogates all over the state, all over the country, but particularly in battleground states, putting out press conferences, putting out press releases, talking about how this election is fraudulent, how they have examples of people who are voting illegally. They'll just be videos of people just voting, but they're going to talk about how these people are voting illegally. They have proof that these people are not citizens. They're going to do all that stuff on election day so that they can make their case on election night when it is clear that they have lost, that this whole thing was fraudulent. And they'll turn back to 21 days when they said it was rigged. They'll turn back to the 14 days and their attacks on early and absentee voting. They're going to go back to 7 days before election day, talk about how they talked about calling off the election because there was so much fraud and abuse. And on election day, they will tell you that we have direct knowledge, lots and lots and thousands, hundreds of thousands of incidences of fake voting and whatnot. And then the real fight will begin, because Kamala Harris will win this thing in a landslide, and they will dispute this election. And depending on what state you're in and what elective system that you have there and what changes have been made in election certification rules and laws and procedures in your state because of the 2020 race and because of states that are run by Republicans who were kowtowing to Donald Trump and basically changed the laws because he told them to do so, we're going to have a bunch of legal cases that come right after that. And my fear is, I don't know if we can bring our country together after that happens. But I do know one thing after that. That when it does happen, no matter how rough and how crazy it is, on Election Day, when Kamala Harris wins by a landslide, we will be done with MAGA in a very real way. And we will be done, and the Republican Party will get back to being the Republican Party that we can just disagree with and not have to be our enemies because they're an existential threat to democracy and to our institutions because they support an authoritarian wannabe strongman who wants to threaten those institutions. And we can get back to the good old days of Democrats and Republicans just opposing each other on policy and how we view the world. And I'll leave it with this. I'm looking forward to getting back to those times because of what Jamie Raskin, my congressman from Maryland, said to Liz Cheney when they served on the January 6th bipartisan committee. Liz Cheney, as you know, endorsed Kamala Harris, as did her father, former Vice President of the United States of America, Dick Cheney. But she was a Republican congresswoman from Wyoming, and my congressman, Jamie Raskin, is a Democratic congressman from Maryland. And he said to her on the floor when he was reading points from their final report, he said, Congresswoman Cheney, I look forward to getting back to the days when you and I can butt heads and argue vociferously and strenuously on tax policy, on the best way to create jobs, that we can argue about abortion, right to life versus being pro-choice. And we can argue about the budget. And we can argue about how much money we should spend on defense versus domestic entitlement programs and what our take is on the debt and the deficit. I don't want to have to be working on this kind of stuff with you. I want to get back to a sense of normalcy where our institutions require us and call us to be one, opponents, not enemies. Thank y'all for rocking with me. Appreciate you as always. Subscribe, like, and comment below. Make sure you hit the notification bell to know when we go live. We go live every Wednesday night, typically at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for rocking with your boy. Thank you for listening to me. Please spread the word. Let people know what we're doing. We're building it as we fly. We're going to go do a live on TikTok for about 1 hour before we call it a night. But again, check out my page. Check out my other videos. Please share this live whenever we go live again. Share it with others. Share my videos if you like them with others. Thanks again for rocking with me. I appreciate you. Love you. Stay curious. And remember, think. It ain't illegal yet.